Peanut farmer, naval officer, civic activist, Jimmy Carter became the 39th President of the United States. His one-term presidency was often turbulent.
The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
His time in office was followed by 4 decades of philanthropy and diplomacy, the longest post-presidential career in U.S. history. James Earl Carter was born in 1924 in Plains, Georgia, a town of about 600 at the time, in a home without electricity or indoor plumbing. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, studied engineering, and served on one of the first American nuclear submarines as a lieutenant. After the death of his father Earl in 1953, Carter left his military career and returned to manage what became a prosperous peanut farming business. He then won a seat in the Georgia State Senate, followed by a term as governor in 1970, before setting his sights on the White House.
Jimmy who? Jimmy who?
Jimmy Carter.
I don't know who he is.
Few people outside of Georgia knew Carter when he announced his bid for the Democratic Party's nomination for president in 1976.
Jimmy Carter is running for what? And what was about this?
His Republican opponent was incumbent President Gerald Ford, the man who took over from Richard Nixon during the Watergate scandal. In the midst of the Cold War, one debate exchange with Ford became a foreign policy focal point of the 1976 campaign.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
And I would like to see Mr. Ford convince the Polish Americans and the Czech Americans and the Hungarian Americans in this country that those countries don't live under the domination and supervision of the Soviet Union behind the Iron Curtain.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will...
Carter just edged out Ford to win the presidency.
We will be ever vigilant and never vulnerable, and we will fight our wars against poverty, ignorance, and injustice.
On the home front, rising gasoline prices overshadowed much of Carter's presidency. Critics blamed his policies for fueling inflation and frustration. Carter claimed some success in foreign policy. He brokered the historic Camp David peace accord between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. He made nuclear arms reduction a major focus. Talks with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev were complicated by the U.S. president's criticism of the Kremlin's human rights record. But in 1979, Carter and Brezhnev signed the SALT II Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, agreeing to cap levels of nuclear weapons. 6 months later, when Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan, relations with Moscow turned colder.
And I have notified the Olympic Committee that with Soviet invading forces in Afghanistan, neither the American people nor I will support sending an Olympic team to Moscow.
The last years of his term brought his darkest days. In November 1979, Iranian militant students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans as hostages. The hostage takers demanded the return of Iran's former Shah for trial after he was allowed into the United States for cancer treatment. As weeks turned to months, 2 U.S. military aircraft collided on the ground in the remote Iranian desert during a botched mission to rescue the hostages.
There was no fighting, there was no combat, but to my deep regret, 8 of the crewmen of the 2 aircraft which collided were killed, and several other Americans were hurt in the accident.
I, Ronald Reagan.
The Iran debacle and a struggling economy hampered Carter's bid for a second term. He was defeated soundly by the Republican governor of California, Ronald Reagan. Just minutes after Reagan was sworn in as president in January of 1981, Iran released the American hostages after holding them for 444 days. Carter returned to his home in rural Georgia, but did not retire from the world stage. He set up a series of civic initiatives. With his wife, Rosalind, he established the Carter Center in 1982 to pursue peace, protect human rights, and fight diseases around the world. Carter was also active in the charity Habitat for Humanity to help poor people build their own homes. He spread goodwill, often with his own hands. In 2002, Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his years of work in diplomacy and promoting social justice.
We can choose to alleviate suffering. We can choose to work together for peace. We can make these changes. And we must. Thank you.